He spent 40 years getting there. 40 years in a desert that takes 11 days to cross on foot. 11 days. The same journey that consumed 4 decades of the most consequential life in the Hebrew Bible. Moses did not choose this assignment. He was 80 years old when God spoke to him from a burning bush and told him to go back to the country he had fled as a fugitive. He argued. He made excuses. He asked God to send someone else. And when he finally went, he stood alone before the most powerful ruler on earth and said, "Let my people go." He watched 10 plagues dismantle an empire. He stretched out his hand over the Red Sea and watched it divide. He climbed a mountain alone and came back down with the law of God carved in stone. He interceded for a people who built a golden calf while he was still on the mountain and talked God out of destroying them entirely. He organized a nation from nothing in a desert for 40 years. And then, at the very border of the land he had spent his entire life working toward, God told him he would not enter it. Not that he would enter it late, not in diminished capacity. He would climb a mountain, see the land from a distance, and die on the wrong side of the Jordan River. The punishment does not match the crime, not on the surface, not when you read the verse quickly, not when you weigh it against everything Moses had done and endured. But here is the thing. The surface reading is not the real reading. What actually happened at that rock, what Moses did, what it meant, and why God responded the way he did, is one of the most layered moments in the entire Torah. And once you see all 3 layers, the punishment does not just make sense. It becomes inevitable. To understand what happened, you need to know one thing that most people never notice. God provided water from a rock twice, but the instructions changed completely. The first time is Exodus chapter 17. The Israelites are in the desert at a place called Rephidim. No water. They complain. God tells Moses, "Take your staff and strike the rock." Moses strikes it. Water flows. Crisis resolved. Moses did exactly what God said. It worked perfectly. Now jump forward 38 years to Numbers chapter 20. Different location. Kadesh, in the desert of Zin. A new generation has grown up in the desert. The generation that left Egypt is almost entirely dead. Miriam, Moses' sister, has just been buried. And the new generation gathers against Moses and Aaron with the same complaint. There is no water. Why did you bring us into this desert to die? Moses and Aaron fall on their faces before the tent of meeting. God appears, and God gives Moses a new instruction. He does not say strike the rock. Numbers 28. Take the staff, gather the assembly, and speak to the rock before their eyes. It will pour out its water. Speak to the rock, not strike it. The method is different, deliberately, specifically, meaningfully different. Now here is what Moses actually does. He takes the staff, he gathers the assembly, he opens his mouth and speaks to the people, not the rock. He says, "Listen, you rebels. Must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then he raises his staff and strikes the rock. Twice, water gushes out. The people drink, the livestock drink. The miracle works, and God delivers the most devastating verdict of Moses' life. Numbers 20:12. Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. 40 years, reduced to a border view. Now here is where the real investigation begins. Because the text gives God's stated reason, you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy, but does not tell you precisely which action crossed the line. Centuries of scholarship point to 3 distinct pillars, not 5 competing theories. 3 interlocking realities that together explain why this specific moment carried this specific weight. The first pillar is pride, expressed as anger. Look at what Moses said before he struck the rock. "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" 2 violations compressed into 1 sentence. The word rebels. Moses had been leading this people for 40 years. He had absorbed their complaints before, at the Red Sea, at Marah, at Rephidim, in the wilderness of sin. He had interceded for them when God wanted to destroy them. He had defended them with his own life on the mountain. But here, publicly, before the entire assembled nation, he called them rebels, not with sorrow, with visible contempt. Rabbi Maimonides, the 12th century Jewish philosopher considered among the greatest Torah scholars in history, argued in his Guide for the Perplexed that this visible anger was the primary violation. A man of Moses' stature was held to a different standard. When an ordinary person loses their temper, the damage is local. When the figure who stands between God and 2 million people loses his temper publicly, the damage is theological. The people watching did not just see Moses get frustrated. They saw their entire relationship with God filtered through a man who was visibly furious with them. Then the word, must we bring you water? Not God, not the Lord your God. We, Moses and Aaron. In a single pronoun, in front of the entire nation, Moses redirected the source of the miracle from God to himself. This was not accidental phrasing. It was a public misattribution of divine power. And it happened at exactly the moment when a watching generation needed to see where the water actually came from. The second pillar is the most theologically significant, and it is the one that explains why God changed the instruction in the first place. At Rephidim 38 years earlier, God told Moses to strike the rock. That was the right method for that moment, for that generation. A generation born into Egyptian slavery, freshly liberated, who understood power through force. They needed to see a physical demonstration, a staff, a rock, a strike, water, power made visible through action. But 38 years had passed. A new generation stood in front of Moses at Kadesh. They had grown up watching manna fall from the sky every morning. They had grown up seeing the pillar of fire every night. They did not need a demonstration of force. They needed to see something different, that the word of God alone, spoken to a rock, was sufficient to produce water from stone, that the God of Israel did not operate like Egypt, that he did not require force or technology or visible human effort. He required only speech. God was teaching a new generation the difference between Egypt's power and his own. Moses collapsed that distinction. He defaulted to the old method, the staff, the strike, because it had worked before. In doing so, he told a new generation the wrong thing about the God they were about to enter a covenant land with. He showed them a God who works through force when God was trying to show them a God who works through word. This is the deepest meaning inside the phrase, "You did not honor me as holy," in the sight of the Israelites. Holiness here is not about ritual purity. It is about accurate representation. Moses represented God inaccurately at the moment that mattered most, and the people who watched, who would carry that image of God into the promised land, needed a leader who could represent God correctly. The third pillar is the weight of the position itself. The principle running underneath the entire incident is stated nowhere explicitly in this passage, but it is embedded in the structure of Moses' entire career. The higher the position, the higher the standard, not because God is cruel, because the damage from misrepresentation scales with the audience and the authority of the person misrepresenting. Moses was not an ordinary Israelite who lost his temper at a rock. He was the mediator between God and the entire nation. His actions at the rock were not private. They were performed in front of every man, woman, and child Israel had. Whatever Moses did with that staff became, in the eyes of the watching community, the way God operates. A strike instead of a word, a we instead of God, an angry man instead of a composed representative. Three things, in one moment, in front of everyone. And the verdict was not disproportionate. It was precisely proportionate to the position Moses held, to the audience that was watching, and to the God whose character was being represented. There is a detail in the geography of Moses' death that the text handles with a restraint that is itself remarkable. Deuteronomy 34. Moses climbs Mount Nebo. God shows him the entire land, from Gilead to Dan, the territory of Naphtali, Ephraim, Manasseh, Judah, the Negev, the Jordan Valley, Jericho, and the Mediterranean coast. God names every region. Moses sees all of it in full. Then Moses dies at 120 years old. The text specifies, his eyes were not dim and his natural energy had not faded. He did not die of old age or physical decline. He died at the border, in full health, with his eyesight intact, seeing everything he would not touch. Deuteronomy 34:6 says, God buried him. The location is unknown to this day, not because the record was lost, but because the text says explicitly that no one knows the place of his burial. A rabbinic tradition preserved in the Talmud states the burial site was deliberately concealed to prevent Moses' grave from becoming a shrine, to stop Israel from doing to his memory exactly what he had done at the rock, redirecting their focus from God to the man who served him. The hiddenness of the grave was the final protection against the very tendency the rock incident exposed. Here is what this entire story forces you to confront. Moses was the greatest prophet in the Hebrew Bible. Deuteronomy 34:10 states this without qualification. No prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. This is not a secondary figure. He is the defining human being of the entire Torah, and the moment that ended his career was not a great moral failure. It was not murder, or idolatry, or apostasy. It was 30 seconds at a rock in which he struck instead of spoke, claimed credit instead of deflecting it, and showed anger instead of composure. In front of the people he was leading into a covenant with God. 30 seconds after 40 years. That ratio is not an injustice. It is the clearest possible statement about what leadership at that level actually costs. The Standard does not care about your record. It does not give credit for 40 years of faithfulness against 30 seconds of failure. Not when those 30 seconds happened in front of a watching nation, with a staff in your hand and the character of God on the line. Moses got Israel to the edge of everything he had worked for. He saw it, clearly, with undimmed eyes. From a mountain he would never descend. And the God who buried him in an unmarked grave, the same God who had spoken to him face to face, who had carried him through 40 years of desert, did not do it out of cruelty. He did it because the man who stands between God and the people cannot afford to let the people confuse the man for the miracle, not even for 30 seconds, not even at a rock.